Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I'm here for my LCS Winners Round 1 overview and analysis of both of the two upper bracket series that we got. Now, I'm going to be doing this series just a tad bit differently. If you have been following my LPL and my LCK overviews and analysis, you'll know that I don't always go exactly with how the leagues themselves implement the schedule or separate a lot of the games. I'm going to try to get a preview in for every single matchup that we have here, which means that we're going to be doing a video what is essentially in the middle of round 1 here, as we still have the lower bracket round 1 to do, but the upper bracket round 1 has been completed. The first two series have been done there, so we're going to be going over those two today. What teams stood out, what teams looked bad, what players looked good, what players looked bad. All of that we're going to go over today, but let me know down in the comment section below how you felt about both of the series that we're going to be talking about here today. I think they were both incredibly interesting series, both pretty back and forth, and definitely a lot of takeaways, I think, from both that we'll be going over here today. But let me know how you guys felt about them down in the comment section below. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So we had the upper bracket series. Of course, the number 1 and the number 2 seeds get a bye. The number 7 and 8 seeds are automatically slotted into the lower bracket as well. And so today we've got our 3-6 matchup, our 4-5 matchup, both incredibly interesting. We are going to kick it off, though, with our 3-6 matchup here between Team Liquid and FlyQuest. Now, this was an incredibly interesting series, one that I was definitely really intrigued to look at. I think there were a lot of matchups that I think you could point to and say they are incredibly important. I think the top lane matchup was something that was really important in this matchup in the regular season. Bwipo really getting the a big handle on Philip and being able to obliterate him basically in lane both times, causing a lot of problems for FlyQuest. The jungle matchup would be interesting, both kind of facilitators for their team. So Jose a little bit more aggressive with that. And then the bot lane matchup was certainly interesting here between Hansa and Johnson. Johnson obviously having a really good year paired up with Aphromoo being kind of the central late game focus for FlyQuest, whereas Hansa has had a little bit of a down year, so can they repeat that? But obviously my key matchup here was in the mid lane, Bjergsen and Takoya. Both of these teams really like to play through that mid lane, and it was definitely going to be interesting to see which one of them could get the advantage here. But that's all the preview. Let's go ahead and just get right into our game number 1. And game 1 was a FlyQuest win here. A pretty big win for FlyQuest to kick off this series. Not a lot of people, me included, thought FlyQuest had a lot of a chance in this series. So for them to come out and get the first win here is really important. Game 1 is actually a very important game for how the series typically goes as a whole. And FlyQuest really comes out shooting here. I really like their draft. It's very much a team fight focused draft. Very much they want a 5v5 here, but they do give themselves options to give themselves early game advantages. You got to give a lot of credit here to Philip in the top lane. He's going to get my player of the game here on the Aatrox. Really a phenomenal performance. Pretty rare to see an Aatrox kind of dominate a laning phase like this, but they really invested into him, and honestly, he just played it very well. He outplayed Bwipo heavily, which, you know, I was talking about this in my preview and just a couple seconds ago, that Bwipo was really a big reason why FlyQuest had a ton of trouble beating them, because he would be able to generate leads against Philip. Philip did a great job practicing and scouting, obviously. Bwipo goes for the ego. Olaf pick gets countered with the Aatrox, and Aatrox really demolished this team. Like, there was absolutely no way they were ever going to be in a position to kill him, and he played it, Philip, I think, played it basically perfectly, whether it be getting, you know, getting a 1v1 kill on Bwipo in lane, or, you know, getting dove and not dying. Like, there were a lot of really good things that Philip did in this game that I was just really impressed by, so he's pretty easily my player of the game. Let's give a lot of credit to the bot lane, though. Johnson and Aphromoo really did a good job coming through in the late game here on the Aphelios Alistar. Now, Alistar is a really interesting pick. We're going to see it a few times in this series. We're not really seeing this anywhere else. It's one of the few tanky engaged supports that I think are still relatively viable, mostly because I think a lot of what Alistar does is versatile. Like, he can be peel, he can be engaged, he can still be just like a frontline bruiser with the ultimate, right? So there's a lot of things that I think he does, and I think that opens up a lot of options for someone like the Aphelios. Not really a high priority on enchanters this series. We're going to get back to that, but definitely an interesting call. Overall, I think in game 1 it definitely worked. The Alistar was really a problem. Like, core kept going in, and the peel from the Alistar was really heavy, and it became quite a problem, and even on the Wukong it became quite a problem. And so Johnson just had a lot of time, and Azir on that same Wavelength had a lot of time to be able to actually hit towards the back half of this game, and obviously look at this team comp. Like, you have Vi and Alistar going in for Peel, you have Aatrox on a flank, you have Azir and Aphelios doing ridiculous scaling damage. Like, if you get that 5v5 and you're in a relatively good spot, you're just simply going to win it. Sometimes I'd be worried about a draft like this, indexing too far into the late game and not having enough early game pressure, but honestly, they played it well enough in the early game that they got to that late game portion with gold, and they were just really going to take over from that point. So FlyQuest, honestly, I thought played it really well. As for Team Liquid, not as great. Certainly not as dominant, in my opinion. Bwipo just got outplayed in the top lane. There's really no other way to say it. He's going to be the dud of the game here in game 1. He just got outplayed. He got solo killed by Philip, which is great. Like, shout out, Philip. You love to see rookies coming in and performing, but not a great look for Bwipo on the Olaf pick, which has kind of been his signature over the course of this split at the very least, and obviously it did not work out here. This is kind of I called it an ego pick, and I stick by that, where I think Olaf is a pick where you have to know you're into a good matchup, and I can see where Olaf into Aatrox could theoretically be good, but overall it just wasn't. It did not work out, so outside of that, like I said, I thought Core just kind of got outplayed by Afro for a majority of this game. Santorin got outplayed by Jose Deodo. Bjergsen and Hans were fine. They didn't really do all that much, but they were fine. They just weren't all that impactful in the game. Overall, just it was really the top lane matchup that kind of spiraled out of control, and Johnson also got to the point where he was able to do a lot of damage in the back half of those team fights. So overall, Team Liquid kind of just put themselves in a bad position from the jump. But it's not the worst thing in the world. It's just game 1. Obviously, you'd like to take game 1, get the momentum rolling, but at the end of the day, one game isn't going to ruin your entire series, and I certainly think they can bounce back from this. As for FlyQuest, hopefully they can carry that momentum into the rest of the series, because really, I like what they did here. Even if they are indexing a little bit too much into late game and draft, in my opinion, if you're going to be able to play the early game well because of it, obviously it's the best of both worlds. It's just a very risky option. So it's good to see them be able to win some matchups that, quite frankly, might be a little bit more difficult come future situations. So, can they maintain the early lead here? Can FlyQuest go up 2-0, which is kind of a death sentence in terms of playoff series? In game 2, they cannot. TL does equalize it here at 1-1. A very good game from Team Liquid, and this kind of goes back to basics, I think, for them. This was really dominant as a win for them. There was really no hope for FlyQuest after an early, skirmish here. Team Liquid is actually the one that takes away the Alistar in this game, and it really, really works out. But they also pick up the Sejuani to be a little bit more safe in the top lane, as opposed to that Olaf pick. And you go for the Draven on Hansama, which obviously, if Draven's meta, you just have to ban it against Hansama. We've known this for years and years and years. You just can't let him get his best champion. It just cannot happen. And Hansama does get it, and they do the right thing. Santorin goes bot lane and invests in that lane. Core plays super aggressive into the Sivir, and they try to get that Draven snowball rolling. They do it incredibly well. Hansama just gets completely out of control by the midway point of this game, and he is easily going to be player of the game here for the Team Liquid win. He was doing unbelievable damage. He was actually two-shotting basically everybody in the game from the midway point onwards. It's actually absurd how much damage Draven can do if you get that ball rolling. The tricky part with Draven always is getting the ball rolling, but Core played really well, like I said, on the Alistar, being able to get those engages into the Braum, into the Wukong when he would come bot to try and assist. And then later in the game, into the Renekton, who just was a complete non-factor. Santorin also doing a really good job of investing into that bottom lane to make sure that Hansama does have the gold to be able to play. And then shout out to Bwipo and Bjerg. Not really all that influential in terms of the grand scheme of things here, but Bwipo gets put on a tank and just goes on tank duty, says, like, screw it, I'm just gonna not lose to Renekton. And Philip honestly gets super duper far behind to the point where he's completely useless. This is a matchup that he has to be able to take advantage of, and he doesn't. And then Bjergsen's fine on the Azir. Really not like an unbelievable game from Bjergsen, just a good game. This was a bot-focused game for Team Liquid for sure. Basically from moment one, and it got, it worked. It got to the point where they got every dragon, they took over every team fight. It just was never all that close. So, I like the draft. I like the Alistar with the Draven. I actually think that can be relatively dangerous to play into, mostly just because, like, if Alistar lands all his shit on you, or he knocks you into Draven or something like that, there is, like, no way out. You're actually just dead, and if he starts racking up those kills, it's only going to get worse. So, I kind of like that combo a lot. Hansama definitely played it well, and he deserves player of the game, but big shout out to Core. I think he definitely gets my secondary player of the game there. As for FlyQuest, I don't hate this draft. I usually talk about, like, maximizing your windows, and I think in the last game, honestly, they did not, because they didn't really have a lot of early pressure. In this game, I actually think you do have some places to go in the early game while also maintaining a lot of pressure in the late game. The problem was your late game carry just got beat, like super duper hard in Sivir here, to the point where there was nothing that they could really do. Like, Draven was so online that the Sivir was never really going to be able to actually keep up with that kind of damage in team fights, and that was going to be a problem for FlyQuest, because you look at the other two solo laners on this team. You've got Renekton, early game monster, who, first of all, generally falls off, but second of all, got super duper far behind in this game. And then a LeBlanc, who's just not fit to be like a super carry in a team fight. You know, at best, she's going to be able to do her combo on Draven, but it probably won't even kill. And if the Sedge and the Viego and the Alistar are playing well, it shouldn't even really be allowed. So, really not a lot of options. You have the Wukong for engage, but he's never going to be able to get on anybody. Braum to try and keep the Sivir alive. Like, overall, I get the idea of this draft, and I think in a different circumstance, I would like what FlyQuest did here, but the problem was that they lost the early game so hard, and most of their picks were early game focused, that the Sivir really just never had a chance to be able to get online, and the Braum never really had a chance to keep her from getting online. So overall, just not a great game there. I have to talk about Philip here, 0-7-0 on counterpick Renekton. I'm anti-Renekton. I'm not anti-Renekton. I'm not nearly as anti-Renekton, I think, as some other analysts out there. You know the ones I'm talking about. But I don't think he's all that. I don't think he's all this, right? Like, obviously, he's a comfort pick for a lot of top laners, pretty much every top laner, because of how consistently he's been in the meta. A lot of top laners, I think, feel like he is just the best pick in almost any circumstance. But, man, he did not do well in this game, and we've seen multiple times throughout multiple different regions in the playoffs here that Renekton is really not all that unless he gets ahead. And if he doesn't get ahead, he might be the worst top lane champion you could pick. So, definitely a risky pick there, and I don't expect to see... I would say I don't expect to see a lot of teams continue to push for him, because I don't think he's all that good, but at the end of the day, like, I don't know, people really like Renekton, so he's gonna keep getting played. Jose Deodo got completely outplayed in this one. Like I said, tried to make some plays on Hansama, and just by that point, it was completely done. Like, Hans was obliterating him through the midway point of the game, so Jose Deodo just got completely outclassed in this game, was never really on the same level. Takoya had no impact on the LeBlanc, but who was he gonna kill? Like, actually, who was he gonna kill in this game? And then, like I said, Johnson needed to get ahead and just unfortunately couldn't. So, overall, not a good game from FlyQuest. This was a pretty big domination, even worse than game one. And then for TL, like, you just, if Hansama gets Draven, you're probably going to win the game. Like, FlyQuest is probably going to ban out Draven every game from now on, and I imagine he will not see that champion for the rest of playoffs, because why would you let Hansama have Draven, like, in a Draven meta? It just feels absurd to me that this was even allowed to happen, and he made him pay for it. This was a free game 2 win, and it was really, really strong by TL. But now that we're tied up at 1 apiece, we basically enter a best of 3 here. Who is going to take the big advantage here, moving into game 3 to go up 2-1? In game 3, it is Team Liquid picking up the game 3 win, setting themselves up in a really good spot here, and this was another relatively dominant win. Now, both teams, I think, doing really interesting things. I really like Team Liquid's draft. I think overall, this is disgusting to have to fight into. Not only do you have Nautilus to engage from the front, not only do you have Seraphine ultimate to basically guarantee a bunch of stuff here, but you have Renekton that can flank from the back and basically corner people into a channel for Seraphine to ultimate, for Swain to press his R and just stand there, for Trundle to be able to enable. Like, there is a lot of really interesting things that happened here with TL's draft, and I actually really like it. I love the Seraphine pick. I've talked about it all year long. I think Seraphine is super duper good right now, and if you can pick her, I recommend that you do. I don't think she's like, you know, unlosable, right? But, you know, into Zeri or something, I don't think it's all that great of a matchup, or Sivir maybe, but into Lucian Nami, I think that's really good for Seraphine, especially if you can pair her with an engager that can really keep Lucian off of you. Someone who can at least, maybe you don't have to actively threaten the range, but at least someone who can stand there and say, like, hey, if you do try to step up and fight Seraphine, I will punish you for it. Like, you don't even actually have to do it. So, really like the draft here, but you gotta give credit where credit is due. Player of the game has to go to Bjergsen here on the Swain. I've talked about this all year long. Swain has been the golden goose pick for Team Liquid. Every single time they have picked this, Bjergsen has absolutely popped off after 15 minutes. And the trend continues here in playoffs. I would highly expect this team to continue to go to the Swain pick purely for how ridiculously successful it continues to be. And Bjergsen did that here. Like I said, the channels that were filed into here with Renekton kind of flanking from the back, Seraphine pushing in from the front, even the Nautilus, look, just creates this big clump of FlyQuest players that Bjergsen can stand in, drain tank, and do a billion damage to with his ultimate and with all of his abilities. He was super influential towards the back half of this game, and he very much deserves the player of the game. I already kind of shout out Hansama for a lot of his ultimates. Core, I thought, played it well in that same vein, but you got to give a lot of credit to Santorin as well for creating so much here on the Trundle. He had a very good game 3. He was nearly my player of the game here, very, very, very narrowly, but it goes to Bjergsen. At the end of the day, I think both of them played really well, and without either, I'm not sure they win the game nearly as confidently as they did here, but a big shout out to that jungle mid duo. When they get these two champions, they run over the game. I really think you're getting to the point where Draven and Swain have to be your two auto bans against Team Liquid. And if you feel like you need to ban, the Kalista, or you feel like you need to ban the Poppy from Santorin over that, like, that's a problem. And so, definitely some things to consider there, but overall, just a really good game from Team Liquid, a really good draft. I think overall, can definitely see the idea from it, and I think they executed on it well. As for FlyQuest, little bit of a back and forth here. They go back to the Aatrox here in the top lane, but this time it's into the Renekton. Definitely not a matchup that's as punishing as the Olaf. I think Renekton definitely has a little bit more agency in that lane, and I think Whippo definitely showed that off. And then the jungle, like, you just got completely out-jungled. Santorin was everywhere on the map. Jose Deodo on the Vi really had no shot. Like, her goal, I think, was really to go top lane and to make plays there, or to go bot lane and try to get Lucian Nami ahead, because that's what Lucian Nami has to do against Seraphine, and unfortunately, he didn't accomplish either of those things. You have a Swain versus Azir matchup, which I think is pretty Swain favored. Both of them like to get to late game, but honestly, like, Swain's just going to drain tank if he goes even, so really don't see a lot of options for Azir unless he gets a lot of early pressure, and Jose didn't want to invest in that. Overall, Jose Deodo is going to get my dud of the game. Really no map pressure. Like I said, Santorin had a phenomenal one. He was everywhere on the map on the Trundle, as he typically is on either the Trundle or the Volley Bear, like the two picks that I think we all most associate Santorin with, but Jose Deodo did a poor job of keeping up with it, I will say. Going back to the Vi here, I don't think Vi is a bad pick. I do think it's slightly overrated in the meta right now, though. Very good for super aggressive gameplay, but is definitely not a safe pick that you can just guarantee get to late game on and be an influential engager. Point and click is always good as an engage, but at the end of the day, like, outside of that, Vi just doesn't really offer all that much, and in the early game, if she's not winning those trades, she's really not all that worth it. But outside of that, like I said, Johnson and Avramu just got beat by Hansama and Core JJ. Core played really well in the mid game here, even if they weren't getting a lot of active success. Just the presence of the Nautilus here allowed Seraphine to play so aggressive, and I think that really helped out a lot. Overall, just not a good game from FlyQuest. Like, Philip getting outplayed, Johnson Afterman getting outplayed, Jose Deodo having a really bad game. Takuya wasn't all that bad on the Azir, but like I said, what's he really going to do here? At the end of the day, he just has to hope he doesn't get hit by Seraphine ultimate and just tries to do as much in the team fight as he possibly can. Just making sure he doesn't get flank killed by Renekton. So, overall, really interesting game. I think TL played it very well. This is probably one of the more clean drafts that we've seen in the series. I think it really accentuates TL's strengths, whether it be the Swain Trundle, like mid-jungle. I think Seraphine in the bot lane's great. I think it really just combines a lot of the things that I really like about Team Liquid right now into one series, and I think that's good. As for FlyQuest, the problem is that they just can't keep up in terms of talent in the early game. I don't even think it's all that much draft, but Jose Deodo is just not playing as well as Santorin. Johnson and Aframu are just not as good as Hansama and Core JJ, so really you just have to hope that moving in here to Game 4 that they can just keep up the pace and send this hopefully to a Game 5. But can they do that? Can FlyQuest bring this one to a Game 5, bounce back here in Game 4, or is TL going to close it out? Well, moving on to Game 4, we have a TL closeout dominant win. After Game 1, they just looked completely unstoppable. And it's, again, going back to a lot of the things that this team does really well. They're able to get the Sivir here, and I really like that. They're able to get an Ahri, a roaming, aggressive playmaker here for Bjergsen. Whippo on another signature pick of his, the Gragas. Santorin gets a signature Trundle. Core gets his Leona. Just a lot of really positive things for Team Liquid. And then on FlyQuest side, they wanted to go for some crazy shit. Like, there's really no other way to say it. Philip goes for his Camille, his signature pick. I had been talking about this all year long. The biggest thing I had worried about with Philip was his champion diversity here. Was it really felt like in Academy that he was like a Camille Jace player, and then everything else was significantly worse than that. He goes back to the Camille definitely for comfort here in Game 4 against Team Liquid. And you draft what I can only describe as a crazy pick comp, like a pick comp that you just have to succeed on in the mid game in order to win here. You draft the LeBlanc, you draft the Vayne, which is crazy, but what I really don't get is why you pick the Alistar with the Vayne. I'll get to that later, but let's talk about Team Liquid first because they played really well. Bjergsen's going to get my player of the game here on the Ahri. Talk about someone who was really taking over the map, whether it be just completely out-shoving and out-maneuvering the LeBlanc in the Assassin matchup here. I think generally speaking, that's almost always going to be Ahri favored, mostly because she's simply just better in the meta right now. She creates more for her team, and I think that's really what you want out of a mid laner. But even outside of that, her charm is significantly better than the damage that LeBlanc gives out in a team fight, and so overall, I think Ahri is just a positive matchup. She has better wave clear, you know, whatever, right? Like, you can say whatever you want. Ahri is just, I think, a better pick, and I think Bjergsen took advantage of that in the matchup here, where he was able to impact not only his own lane with Santorin, but to be able to go top lane and mess up the Camille, to be able to help out later in the game, to be able to secure objectives. Bjergsen, I think, did a really good job of all of that, and so that's why he's going to get my player of the game here. But you got to give a lot of credit again to Santorin here on the Trundle. Another really phenomenal game from the Trundle player, and he just does it again. He's everywhere he needs to be. He has such a great mind for the map that I think overall, even when, you know, the team comp isn't exactly the most conducive to, like, gank pressure, like, I don't think you're really going to be all that killable. Like, LeBlanc shouldn't be all that killable in the mid lane, or Camille shouldn't be all that killable in the top lane, right? But when you know pathing, when you can confuse the enemy's laners so much so to the point where you can just when they just don't expect you to be there, that creates a lot of advantages. I think Santorin does that almost as good as anybody in the LCS. A really, really good job from him in this game. And then you got to shout out Hansama. He gets to that late game Sivir point. Not that it really mattered. Like, he was able to beat the Vayne in the early game because the range advantage is absolutely massive, and the Alistar really can't do anything to negate that. And so he's just able to get a lead on Johnson and able to take over the game. Definitely a weird lane matchup there, but overall, they played it well, and then Bwipo did great in the top lane, just completely outplaying Philip, again, as we've seen a couple times this series and a couple times throughout the year, even with a little bit of help with Santorin and Bjergsen, but at the end of the day, still a really good game from Bwipo's Gragas, one of his signature picks. So a great win from Team Liquid. They've got to be happy about it. As for FlyQuest, it sucks. It sucks to get knocked out here, but honestly, this was predictable. Like, Team Liquid was the better team, and for them to kind of stomp through 3 games, I don't think is all that surprising. I gotta talk about Vayne Alistar. I just don't like this lane. If you're gonna pick Vayne, especially in this meta, I do not understand how you go anything other than an enchanter. Whether it's Lulu, and Lulu and Yuumi are both banned here, but there's other options. Whether it's Janna, like, I think whether it's Soraka, I think both of those things are very positive for the Vayne, and I think it gives her so many more options in laning phase to play aggressive, to try and sit there and trade with the Sivir, because you're just simply not going to outscale her unless you have kills. The Alistar doesn't give you any of that. Sivir's never in range for Alistar to be a problem, and even if she is, she can spell shield his knockup. So, like, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's weird. It's very, very weird. So, I don't know. Overall, just a very interesting draft from FlyQuest. It did not work out. Another game of LeBlanc for Takuya. I get it. It's your signature pick. It's your best pick. But LeBlanc's just not all that good right now. Like, she doesn't really do all that much. And I think we really saw that throughout the back half of the series, where Takuya, while he wasn't necessarily playing all that bad, he just didn't really have any sort of impact on the series. And that's what happens with LeBlanc from behind, where it's just like, well, you're just there now. Like, you don't have enough damage to actually kill anybody, and so what do you actually do? Like, you don't do anything. Overall, just a very, very poor draft, I think, overall from FlyQuest. I get it, you want to go to comfort, but this is indexing too much into that. There's really no meta in this draft, which I don't like. Philip's gonna get my dead of the game. He just got completely clapped in the top lane multiple times. Again, if you're gonna pick the Camille, you have to be aggressive, especially into the Gragas, but it's super duper punishable, especially when Santorin has a brain. So Philip just got clapped on that over and over again. He got kind of abused in the series overall after the game 1, and just wasn't a great look for him. Not gonna blame him too much. Again, he's a rookie, and no one really expected him to be all that good in this matchup, but definitely something worth noting that he was definitely a negative, I think, overall for FlyQuest. So was Jose Deodo. He got out-jungled again by Santorin. Really nothing else to say. Jose was probably the worst player on FlyQuest in this series. I don't give out duds of the series for playoff, but it probably would have been Jose. He just wasn't all that good in this series. Santorin definitely abused him, especially in the back half of these games. And like I said, Takuya had no impact. Johnson really had no impact. Afra really had no impact on any of these games. It was really Team Liquid completely taking over. Bjergsen's going to get my player of the series here. I think a lot of people are going to want to give it to Hansama. I understand that. I think he falls in second for me, but The trio of Santorin, Bjergsen, and Hansama were so phenomenal. I believe they all had a combined like 3 deaths over the last 3 games, which is absurd. But Bjergsen, I think, really was did a great job of taking over the map, whether it be on the Swain, whether it be on the Ahri. I think he did a great job of transitioning his lead into the late game and being a really big impact towards Team Liquid's success. And, you know, I expected that. Bjergsen, you know, Takuya was my matchup of the series. Bjergsen won it, and TL dominated. I'm really not all that surprised by how the series went down. You gotta be excited for Team Liquid, moving on now to face 100 Thieves. In the second round, that's a very intriguing matchup that we're not going to be previewing today, but we will be getting to soon. As for FlyQuest, they move down to losers bracket. They have to play next weekend against TSM. Definitely an interesting matchup in that respect as well. A lot of things could go right, and a lot of things could go wrong in that matchup, something I'm very excited to preview later today. But as for now, congratulations to Team Liquid. A pretty dominating series here off the back of their main players really showing up, and you really just got to hope that they can continue this success, maybe against some better teams throughout the rest of the playoffs. Moving on now to our second playoff series here of Winners Round 1. Definitely an interesting matchup that we just went over here with TL and FlyQuest, but maybe an even more interesting one in the matchup here between Counter Logic Gaming and Cloud9. Two of the historic organizations here in the LCS going head-to-head for the first time in quite a while here in the playoffs, at least in a meaningful sense. Very excited. A lot of people are pumped about this series because everybody wants to see CLG really overcome the odds, really prove that they belong here in the top 4, and Cloud9 is definitely looking hungry to reclaim their spot in the top 3. So a lot of really interesting dynamics going on at work here, and I'm very, very excited to talk about it. My matchup of the series was, of course, Blabber and Contracts. It couldn't have been anybody else. Both of these teams run through their jungle so much that typically, really, when you get a series between these two teams, the jungle matchup is going to be what determines the winner and the loser. But a lot of really interesting matchups outside of that. I think Fudge Dokla is really interesting. I think Berserker Luger is very interesting. Even Sven Poom, I think, could be very interesting. So a lot of really interesting things happening here in this series and a lot of things to look out for. And it was very exciting to preview, but now we actually get to go over what happened. So what happened in game number 1? Well, game 1 was a C9 win. I tried to build the suspense there just a tad bit. But C9 does pick up the win. A very good game overall from them. And off of the back of what I consider a really good draft for them overall. Not only do they have a lot of agency in this draft, I think generally speaking, with the Kennen in the top lane, a top lane pick that I think can actually really take over the game. Typically right now, and then also a very intriguing bot lane here with the Kalista and the Ashe. Obviously, Sven, former ADC player, you don't need me telling you that. Kalista Ashe is a very, very popular lane in solo queue for a reason, because Ashe slows can really set up Kalista to do a bajillion damage in the early game, and I really can see that working, especially for these two players. Both of them play these champions super well, so really excited to see them go to it, and they very much pulled it off in this game. Now, holy crap, did Ashe just make the enemy team's life a complete living hell throughout a majority of this game. Sven's actually going to get my player of the game for it. He was really, really good. Obviously, his positioning's great, but even at times where they would go in and the Kalista would die, the Ashe was able to take over as kind of that secondary AD carry. But even outside of that, just being able to set up Berserker to do a bajillion damage on Kalista, even though Ashe did more damage in this game, which is funny. Overall, I just think the duo was really, really strong. Berserker and Sven have really, really started to form a nice synergy. I've been really concerned with Sven, I think, as a whole. I was really excited about him at the start of the year because he was playing the picks like Yuumi and playing like Lulu really, really well, but I was starting to get concerned towards the back half of the year because it really felt like when he was taken off of those two picks that he was significantly worse. He goes to the Ashe here. I think Ashe is definitely playable as a support, especially into something like Renata or Sivir, right? Like, I think those are two picks that I think that the Ashe can actually do a lot into, and he pulls it off really, really well here. Obviously, he knows how to play the champ, and it definitely proved it here. Outside of that, everybody else was fine. Fudge dominated his laning phase here on the Kennen. Like I said, the pick has agency, and he was able to use it. One of the few picks that I think can actually really punish the Sejuani in lane, mostly because the Sej can't really punish back. Kennen has way too much mobility and way too much safety, I think, in the laning phase, where he can just kind of poke out the Sej really, really easily. I think a lot of the other matchups like Gwen and Renekton and Gangplank that want to try and do the same thing to Sedge just don't nearly have as easy a time of doing it as the Kennen does. So overall, I think Fudge played it really well, but he had a good matchup. And then you have Blabber and Jensen, who were fine, really weren't the focus of this game. Honestly, a lot of the attention went into the bottom lane, and so they played well. They really didn't make any sort of mistakes at all, but overall, Berserker and Sven were really the focal point of C9, and they carried a lot of what they were doing in this game. For CLG, not a great Game 1 performance. They just got outplayed in a lot of different ways, mostly Palafox and Contracts, who just didn't really show up here today. Palafox did not have a very good game here on the Sylas. The mid game, I think, was not all that bad for him, but the late game here, when you got to the team fighting, was like really abysmal, really not all that much you could do. As for Contracts, he had a bad game, but part of it just really wasn't his fault. He got set up into a really bad spot, obviously. Had his red stolen on his first clear, was always followed with Hawkshot, was continuously invaded throughout the game without any help from his laners. Really, Contracts was set up into a position where he was just never going to be in a relatively good spot this game. It's a really good strategy by Cloud9 because of how much CLG really runs through Contracts and what Contracts wants to do. You get him behind, oftentimes he's going to be trying to force advantages and force his way back into the game, and that can lead to a lot of mistakes that you can capitalize on. And I think even if C9 didn't directly capitalize on all of them all the time here, I still think it was a very good strategy, and I think if you can continue to do that to Contracts throughout the series, you actually put yourself in a pretty interestingly good spot. So overall, C9 played it well. Contracts just didn't really have a shot here on the Vi. Overall, already not a good matchup into the Trundle, but even worse when you don't even get to clear your jungle. But Palafox is going to get my dud of the game. He wasn't given nearly the same kind of handicap, and I think he was just as bad as Contracts in this one, so Palafox is going to get my dud of the game. I've been really high on Palafox throughout the year, and unfortunately just didn't show up in this first playoff game. Doesn't mean it's over. Luger and Poom also got outplayed by Berserker and Sven, but again, I actually think this is a really tough matchup to have to play into. Kalista and Ashe have so much lane prio that you basically just have to concede the entire laning phase, and if you don't, you just lose the game, and so Luger was just overextended at points, Poom was just overextended at points, and Kalista got out of control. The Ashe became a problem as well. Even the Hawkshot was like stopping pretty much every play that they wanted to make, so really just not a lot that you could do on CLG's side this game. Overall, not a good game from CLG, but I think a lot of their problems were just planning. Like a lot of the advantages that C9 were able to get were either in draft or for level 1, expected plays. And so really, I think CLG can go back to the drawing board and hopefully, get themselves in a better position like pre 5 minutes, because I think after that, like, they're talented enough to be able to keep up with Cloud9. They just put themselves in such a hole in this game that it really was never an opportunity or an option. So for Cloud9, you just got to keep doing this. You got to keep having these good level 1, level 3 plays and being able to compound them. Obviously, Blabber's known for these early game aggressive plays that you can draw up and you can play through. If Berserker and Sven and Fudge all want to be a part of that, I think that really helps out a lot of what they do. Obviously, you can get Blabber ahead, you can get Contracts behind, you're in a really good spot. So if you can consistently do that, I think Cloud9 is in a good spot. But can they do that? That's the question now. Moving in to game number 2, and game 2 was a CLG win, kind of tying things up here at 1-1. Obviously, very important win for CLG to not go down 2-0, and they played really well in this game. It wasn't the cleanest game of all time, but definitely some good performances overall and some bad performances on Cloud9. Let's talk about CLG. First and foremost, though, you got to give a lot of credit here to the bounce back of Palafox. He plays Sylas in the game 1, really has no impact on the map, somebody who can really do a lot if he wants to roam, especially into someone like Orianna, who's significantly more stationary with the plays that she wants to make. Palafox can have a lot more options, I think, overall, but he didn't really take advantage of that as much as he could have in game 1. He definitely did here in game 2. He linked up with Contracts, who had a significantly better start, didn't get level 1 beaten early in the game here, definitely had the opportunity to play the game, and was playing the good side of the Trundle-Vi matchup. Was definitely looking a lot better this game, and I think those two really paired up for a lot of really good plays around the map. Being able to help out, especially Palafox in his own lane against the Ahri, but then eventually moving down into the bottom lane and being a problem there. Definitely some cute plays trying to be made from the other side, but I think Luger did a good job of punishing a lot of the over-aggression from the enemy team, especially on that Vi. Very much Blabber went in over and over and over again and hoping to get on that Zeri, and it just was never going to happen. I get the Vi pick into Zeri. I get that you just want to point and click, ult her, and just try to shut her down, try to stop her from moving around, but you have the Lulu ultimate, you have Trundle to disengage, you have the Renekton to stun her immediately after. There are so many things that can keep Zeri alive in this comp that the Vi was quite frankly, essentially useless, even in the role that she was exactly designed to play, which is point and click CC. She didn't even really do that all that well this game, so unfortunately, Luger just had his roam, his free roam here to fight in team fights and was able to do a lot of damage. You have a ton of frontline here. You have Silas, who had a lot of gold, being able to survive a long time. The Trundle being able to steal the, the Amumu or the Vi tankiness. You have the Renekton flanking from behind. You had a lot of options here, and you had the Lulu to keep you alive. You had a lot of options here on the Zeri to be able to win these team fights, and I think he executed on it super duper well. Overall, I think CLG just played it great. Like, Palafox was great this game. Luger was really good. Contracts was really good. Poom was really good. Dokla had his int moments, but it's fine. Like, it didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. The Renekton and Aatrox matchup is always going to be interesting. We've already seen Renekton be a problem for the Renekton team a couple of times. It's going to happen. Renekton's not all that good right now, but people are going to play him anyways. So overall, I think CLG played it fine. Even if it wasn't the most clean win of all time, I definitely think it wasn't a bad one either. As for C9, I think a lot of people are going to want me to give dud of the game here to Blabber in the jungle, and I definitely think he was in the running here. Definitely some plays on Vi that were a huge question mark for me. Didn't really understand the Vi pick here into Trundle. Like, I think this is such a bad matchup for Vi, and I think we've been proving that in the playoffs over and over again, whether it be in LCS, whether it be in the LCK, whether it be in the LPL. I don't think a lot of people are going to tell you that Vi actually has a very easy matchup into Trundle, and I think, again, we saw that here, just like we saw it in Game 1, where there's just not a lot of options. Even if you do get the point and click on the Zeri, she's not all that locked down, because you have so much peel on that side. So, overall, really don't like how Blabber played this game, but it's fine. I'm not going to complain too much. My dud of the game is going to go, actually, to Sven here at the support position. I always talk about this on the channel, how Amumu is a super feast or famine pick in pro play. There were just a lot of times where Amumu can bait his own team into a lot of bad engages, and boy howdy is that what happened in this game. So many times Amumu went in and got a 9-man ultimate somehow on the entire game, because he would get 5 people into the CLG team, and C9 would all run in and, be like, oh, we can win the fight now, and then the ultimate would wear off and they would all die, and it would be like, oh, never mind, we can't kill them fast enough. So yeah, Amumu can definitely be a good pick in the situations where he's ahead and his team can actually capitalize in the time frame that his ultimate is active. But man, there are just so many times where it's like, oh, we got them all stunned, let's go in. And then by the time the ultimate's worn off, like, you just don't have them killed yet and they just turn and kill you. Definitely happened a couple times in this game. Not to mention, he tried to get a little too cute. Really, a couple of really good plays in the early game, using the stopwatch and the Zhonya's in the early game to stop Silas from stealing the Amumu ult. Really like that idea in general, but by the time you get to the late game, by the time Silas hits that level 16, like, his ult's on like a 20-second cooldown, and you're still trying to Zhonya's it. Like, now your Zhonya's is on a 160-second cooldown, and he's just gonna steal it in 20 seconds again anyways, so, like, what did it even really matter? Overall, just not a good play. Some really weird decisions overall from Sven in this game, so he's gonna get my dud of the game, whether it be the troll engages that I think baited his entire team, or the weird stopwatch Zhonya's plays towards the back half of the game. I don't think Sven played all that well. Outside of that, honestly, nobody else played all that bad in this game. I thought Fudge actually won in the top lane. Jensen and Berserker were relatively even. They just couldn't overcome the lack of frontline that they quite frankly had. So, Blabber and Sven kind of ran it in game 2, and it basically gave CLG the win. Overall, a great win for CLG. They're going to be happy to take that. Moving on to, like, the later half of the series. Again, now we move into another best of 3, which I think is significantly more winnable. And Cloud9 definitely is still in this. It's one bad game with a couple of bad plays from some good players. There is a very real shot that they can just turn this around. So, what did they do? Did they turn it around? Is CLG able to continue the momentum? Well, we move on now to game number 3, and game 3 is a C9 win, being able to take a 2-1 lead, and really, this should not have been a C9 win. This should have been a CLG win. They had this in the bag, basically, and C9 was able to come back and put the finishing touches on a 2-1 series lead here, basically off the back of the Sivir just becoming too much to deal with. I really like Nocturne. I think Nocturne is a super underrated pick in the meta right now. We're talking about a lot of disruption, about how that's really good, I think, overall in the meta. Well, Nocturne is a ton of disruption, and especially in this comp where you have a lot of, engage, a lot of things that can, be a problem from far away. You have Nocturne turning out the lights, you have Kennen ultimate, and if you put Ori Ball on top of Kennen, that's a huge problem. You can no longer see where the Nautilus is attempting to engage, and then you also still have the Nocturne going in. Like, you have a lot of options for Engage here to set up Berserker on that Sivir to be able to just free hit on the backline, because she really doesn't need all that much frontline if you're actively just compounding everybody into one zone. Those ricochets are going to kill people very, very quickly, and Berserker, I think, did a really good job of capitalizing on that. He's going to be my player of the game, but overall, I think it was the team comp that eventually just got to this point around 25-30 minutes where if they got their combo off, it was just going to win the 5v5, and I do think that happened in this game. So, what was the goal for CLG? What was the plan for CLG to try to stop this? Well, in their draft, they also have a pretty good, honestly, a pretty good 5v5. It maybe isn't quite the wombo combo of, like, needing Nocturne and Kennen Ultimate to make it work. It's a little bit more sustainable. I think if they just survived a little bit in these team fights, it may have been better, but unfortunately, some poor positioning in the back half of the game here was a really big problem for CLG, and it ended up costing them a lot. Luger dying later in the game was a pretty big deal, and Dokla honestly just wasn't ever in a position to actively protect anybody. On this Edge 1 here, you really have to be especially careful because your frontline duty is honestly not super clear in this game because really what you are is Peel. You need to make sure that the Kennen and the Nocturne aren't the problem. The Nautilus in that same way. The quote-unquote frontline duty isn't as impactful when really the enemy carry is Sivir. And so, you have to make sure that your Zeri and your Ahri are in positions where they can do a lot of the damage here in the late game, and unfortunately, I don't think Dokla was in that spot, so he's going to get my dud of the game here for CLG, but outside of that, I really don't think anybody on CLG played all that bad. It was really just, you couldn't finish it. You couldn't finish off the game. You put yourself in a good position. You have gold on the Zeri. You have Lulu here to protect her. You have gold on the Trundle, on the Ahri to be able to move around significantly more than the Ahri or the Nocturne had. You should theoretically be able to do a lot more in the mid game than them and towards the later half of this game, but unfortunately Cloud9 just played the back half of this game better. Their team comp scaled a little bit better, and I think that was the big problem. So, yeah, Dokla gets my dud of the game, but overall, I really don't even think CLG played all that bad in the long-term run of things here, outside of, you know, maybe just not being able to confirm in a lot of scenarios. It's honestly a little bit difficult to find things to talk about here, because I really just don't think that this game was all that crazy, right? I think Cloud9 was kind of on the back half of the beginning portion of the game. You can talk about Fudge getting a really big lead in the top lane, and I do think Fudge has played this series overall really well. Maybe not the central focus of any of what Cloud9 is doing, but the Kennen pick has really been working out for them. And then, like I said, I think Nocturne is huge, especially with Kennen. I think that duo combo is very scary, whether you want to throw the ball on Nocturne, which you absolutely can do as Jensen. You can throw the ball on Nocturne before he ultimates, have him go in there, and then that shockwave is going to be disgusting to watch, as long as, you know, depending on if you're still in range. But, and then you also have Berserker on the back half, but you can also throw that on the Nautilus. You can throw it on the Kennen. There are a lot of different options here. You can honestly just ult if you want, because they're probably all going to be relatively clumped up, and you have so much CC in this comp that you should be able to layer it in over and over again, especially with the Kennen and the Nautilus. And so, a lot of different options here for Jensen. Even if I don't love the Orianna pick, and even if Jensen really is the only one in the world who's even playing it right now, I do think it could still be a problem just because Shockwave is such a good ability. And you still get a shield here. You're still going to be relatively impactful just as a supportive mid laner. I just think Orianna's damage overall is really, really low. And so, even if she's not a pick that I would recommend going towards right now, I think overall that it kind of works in this comp. And the Wombo definitely works as long as Sivir is on the backline. And Berserker definitely, you know, he went even early and got to the point in the late game where he could be fine. Most of this team went even, except for maybe Fudge, who won. And I think that was really what mattered. But CLG, honestly, like, it's just really hard to fault them for this game. Because at the end of the day, I really don't even think they played all that bad. I really just think that they didn't have quite the Wombo, and they couldn't avoid the first, like, 5 seconds of that critical team fight. And unfortunately, that's really what happened for them. So, overall, a tough CLG loss to go down 2-1 here, but certainly not the end of the series by any means. A lot of possible things happening here for CLG. A lot of things in the works, I think. You definitely still have some players that are performing well. I think Luger and Poom, just like all season long, have been good, and I think this is an opportunity for them to prove that they maybe were underrated going up against Berserker and Sven. I still think Palafox and Dokla have a lot of opportunities to win in their lane matchups, but Cloud9 certainly has the advantage going into here. They only have to win one of the last 2 games, and they definitely have the option to do that. They definitely feel like they have a better grasp on a lot of what the draft is becoming in this series, and so it's definitely going to be interesting moving in to game number 4. And game number 4 was a CLG win, and they tie it up here at 2, send it into a game 5, and that's definitely what we want to see here. These teams have been relatively back and forth, I think, in both of these games. This was a pretty dominant CLG win. Kind of coming off of the back of a game where they probably should have won in Game 3. They come back here in Game 4, and they definitely take it away. They give Dokla the Akali in the top lane, one of his signature picks here that he played all the time in Academy, and boy, howdy, does he completely run over the game on this Akali. Dokla is easily the player of the game. It's really not even up for debate. He played super duper well in the early game here, really punishing the Renekton pick again, pretty much every single time that Renekton has been picked here today, whether it be, early, or I guess in this weekend, whether it be with TL and FlyQuest or Cloud9 and CLG, the Renekton has been punished. This is not a good pick. Like, I don't know why Fudge will see Dokla playing it bad and, like, completely slaughtering Dokla on the pick and then be like, yeah, I can play it. And then also get slaughtered on it, just like he did in Game 2. It's just a really intriguing thing here, and the Akali really, really abused that Renekton, really made it a problem. But it wasn't just the Renekton. A lot of plays made here on the Azir, on the Draven, on the Ashe. A lot of great targets for that Akali to just completely blow up. And I think you could say that a lot about the CLG team in general. They have so much damage here. We have the Akali, you have the Yone, you have the Zeri. Even the Renata is going to cause a ton of panic here on the enemy team. There are so many things that I think are a problem for what is objectively a very squishy Cloud9 comp. You have the Renekton, but outside of that, Trundle relies on stealing stats from the Poppy. Azir, Draven, and Ashe certainly aren't going to assist in having anybody survive in any way, shape, or form. And so you have a lot of options for these two very aggressive picks to come out and really work. And this has kind of been CLG's bread and butter all year, is flexing these really aggressive, like mid-top solo lane assassin, like aggressive type of carries, like the Akali, like the Yone, into top and mid, and being able to play around the lanes that they feel are the most positive for them. And I think it really worked here. Contracts did a really good job of making sure that all three of the lanes really got ahead. He actually did a very good job of maintaining map control. I don't think Blabber did a bad job of being impactful. I just think that, when you look at top, mid, and bot, and every single lane is winning for CLG, Contracts really just has to keep that under control and just make sure that, Blabber doesn't do a lot to get that, back in control. And I think he did that. Overall, every single lane played really well here. Dokla especially, but you got to give a shout out to Luger and Poom, who, like I said, have been super duper underrated for a majority of this game. They've really been one of the best bot lanes in the region for all split long, and I think they're finally starting to get some credit, going up against a really good bot lane in Berserker and Sven, who have definitely had their ups and downs. I think Luger and Poom are showing that the consistency with them is definitely good. He comes out here, plays the Zeri, and he completely destroys the Draven in lane. You can credit a lot of this to Contracts. Like I said, Contracts kind of went sicko mode for a majority of this game. That's part of my notes. That's one of the lines I wrote down is Contracts went sicko mode, so there's that. But overall, I think he helped out this bot lane quite a bit. Luger and Poom did a really good job maintaining a lot of what they wanted to do. The Zeri got online. The problem with Draven, and this is the problem with Draven, right, is he's not this perfect pick that I think a lot of people in the world really see him as, or really see him as potentially in the right circumstances, is if he gets behind, he is like giga useless. He's more useless than Kalista. He's more useless than Lucian. Like, you talk about these early game picks that can have a lot of damage and really can scale out into the late game. Yes, Draven scales significantly better than Kalista or Lucian, but, like, he plays significantly worse from behind than either of those two picks. And so, really unfortunately for Draven, he just, like, for Berserker, he did not win bot lane. Contracts did a really good job of making sure that Luger and Poom had a lot of advantages. Poom also played this lane generally perfectly and just punished this bot lane. And I think that's a general statement. Luger and Poom really punished this bot lane in this game. Shout out to Palafox on the Yone. He was fine, but really, this was a game between Dokla and Contracts in the top side, really going absolutely sicko mode, like I put in my notes. Really, really great game from them. And then Luger and Poom capitalizing on a lot of the advantages made for them. Really good game from CLG in that respect. For Cloud9, like I said, I don't love this draft. I don't love the Renekton in the top lane. I feel like a tank here would have been significantly better for this comp overall. You really want to negate the Akali becoming a problem, or even the Yone becoming a problem. Either of them becoming an issue is not good for your team. And I think Renekton doesn't really do either of those things. Renekton loses to Akali even early in the game. Like, if he doesn't have ultimate, he's just going to get bursted down by her combo. And then you just have the Trundle, basically, for frontline because the Renekton's super far behind. And that's just not going to be enough. Like, the Poppy's playing really well, causes a ton of disruption, really stops the Renekton from being able to get onto the backline. And then after that, you have so much damage coming out from the Akali. You have a super duper fed Zeri and a really far behind Draven Ashe, which does not work. Like, we talked about the Ashe being a good pick earlier. I really do like it with the Kalista or things like that. I really don't like it with the Draven. I really don't think it actually enables the Draven all that much, and it definitely is a little bit punishable by the Renata And that definitely happened in this game. Sven got the dud of the game for me. He was punished a ton here on the Ashe pick. Definitely not the game 1 that we got out of Sven. But, you know, overall it just was a team bad experience. Jensen also had a bad game in the mid lane on the Azir, really accomplishing nothing. Nobody on C9 really had that good of a game. Blabber certainly tried to do things, I think, throughout the, a portion of this game, but overall, he just had to play from so far behind that it didn't really matter. All of his lanes lost, which is a little bit of a feels bad, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. Really, when you're looking at the outlook of what this means, like, going into Game 5, I think both teams have a mental advantage. Like, Cloud9 has proven that when they get their draft off, they win, and CLG has proven that they can pull out some crazy picks, and honestly, they can skill gap a lot of the Cloud9 team, and so really going into this final game, I think draft is going to be very important. Cloud9 tends to suffer when they pick bad things in the draft, and they don't really seem to have that, like, superstar laning status to be able to overcome that. CLG, on the other hand, I think put them on these aggressive picks, put them on the Akali, the Yone, the Zeri. They're going to be able to do a lot of things around the map. You have an enabler like Contracts to be able to move them around. I actually think they put themselves in a relatively decent position, so long as they don't just completely int their draft away, and as long as, Cloud9 doesn't get everything that they want. So, what happens in Game 5? We've talked about all 4 games. It's down to this. It's down to our Silver Scrapes Game 5 between CLG and Cloud9. And the winner of Game 5 is Cloud9. Cloud9 is able to take the series here in 5. A very close series. One that was closer than I expected, even if I picked Cloud9 to win it in the end. Definitely some really interesting plays. The early game was a little lacking in, like, adventurous plays. I think both teams were really afraid of making plays that were going to lose their team the game. Neither wanted to give up a lot of early game pressure. So we end up getting to this latter half of the game, and Jensen makes this really awful teleport play here on LeBlanc that basically throws the game for Cloud9, puts them in a position where they're completely on the back burner. It just allows CLG so much tempo towards the back half of this game, which they really just should not have had. And obviously, in the long run, it didn't end up mattering because CLG throws a little bit harder in the Baron fight later in the game, but that teleport from Jensen was almost like game, like, losing in how bad it was. But then you get to the Baron fight, and honestly, the beginning of the fight starts really well for CLG. They burn a lot of their ultimate cooldowns to push C9 out of the, the fight, but C9 goes to the bush, Luger keeps chasing, and just C9 held all their cooldowns. They turn and burn everything on the Luger. He gets completely blown up, and they lose the fight. They lose the Baron. They lose the game at that point. Really just a phenomenal overall game here from Cloud9, with the exception of what Jensen was doing in the mid game, and they're very lucky they had the Sivir to be able to clear that wave over and over again to make sure that that was never a huge problem. But outside of that, I think they played this game very well. Berserker's going to get my player of the game for that reason. He cleared the waves very well, but even in that last team fight, he was doing a ton of damage. He was really important around Baron. Even if this game was really slow, he eventually got to the point where he was doing a bajillion damage on that Sivir. And like I always say, the Sivir-Zeri matchup is kind of the handshake deal in the meta right now. Unfortunately, when Zeri runs it down here like Luger did in the back half of this game, the Sivir's just going to have a lot easier time of being the central focus in that team fight. And whoever the central focus is at ADC right now tends to win the game. So overall, a really good game from Berserker. He's going to get the player of the game. Sven did a good job on the Lulu, but you got to give a lot of credit to Fudge here for being able to turn and burn on that Zeri. For I don't know who made the call, but whether it was Blabber, whoever made that call was incredibly in the right there. It basically won them that game. There's a very good chance that they're actually in a pretty bad spot if they actually just continue to run there. So really good play there. Really bad play by Luger, but overall a good play by C9 to basically turn the game around and win it for them. But, shout out Fudge on the Sejuani. Shout out Blabber on the Viego, a pick that I really don't like all that much overall, but he ended up making it work. And then Jensen here, not the best play overall, but, he made it work on the LeBlanc in the back half of the game. I can't be too mad at him. As for CLG, it's heartbreaking to lose this way. Adoko had a really good game here on the Gwen. He was doing so much damage and was basically unkillable in the back half of these fights. Gwen can be such a problem if left unchecked. And I really think this game was starting to get a little bit out of control for C9 if things were becoming a problem, because that Karma was going to keep the Gwen alive, and the Vex could do a ton of burst damage, almost as much as the LeBlanc could do, even though LeBlanc had more gold. So really, just a lot of interesting things. If you just had that Zeri on the backline, I think that fight is super winnable, as we saw from the beginning part of that fight, but unfortunately, Luger makes that play towards the back half of the game, runs it down, C9 gets the kill, gets the Baron, ends the game. Luger's gonna get my dud of the game for that. I don't think he, really deserves dud of the game, because he played well up until that point, but that really was, a series-losing play. by Luger, unfortunately, and it is what it is for CLG. Obviously, they're not out of the playoffs yet, but this has got to be a crushing defeat for them. They really threw the game in Game 3, and they threw it again here in Game 5. This really should have been their series with how they played. Unfortunately, it just didn't end up working out for them. So what does that mean as a whole? What does that mean for the series as a whole, or the playoffs as a whole? Well, Cloud9 moves on to play Evil Geniuses in the upper bracket. That's going to be a very interesting series that I'm excited to detail later in the week. But CLG, on the other hand, now moves down to lower bracket. They're going to be facing Golden Guardians. I will be previewing that later in the video. They definitely still have a lot to work towards. Like, their season is certainly not over by any means. Golden Guardians is certainly beatable. And honestly, they showed a lot of good things in here. They just need to take out the mistakes. Really, it's all it is, right? Is you've shown a lot of good things as CLG. If you can just clean up a lot of the edges around all that, this could be a very dangerous team. A team dangerous enough to even potentially contend for a world spot. But there are the edges that you have to clean up. As for Cloud9, they're going to feel very lucky, I think, to get out of the series with the win. I think you can make a real argument that they weren't objectively, like, the best team here, although I definitely think they played well. Berserker is pretty clearly my player of the series here for Cloud9. Without him, they don't win the series, and I think there are definitely moments where he really steps up in the back half of these team fights, especially that Game 3 and that Game 5, where CLG is honestly in a good spot, and without his late game antics, I just don't think Cloud9 really has a shot. So good job, Berserker. He's my player of the series. I would have given it to Sven had he not had a horrible Game 4, but it is what it is. And then Fudge and Blabber, I think, were also pretty good. For Cloud9, this is a good showing, not a great showing. Definitely a lot of things to keep, in mind, and it's not, the most confident win of all time. But again, good things to show. You just have to clean up on a lot of the mistakes and hope that you can punish a lot of what EG has been showing as quote-unquote weaknesses in the upcoming weeks. All right, that is going to do it for my recap and overview of the two upper bracket series. It's time to talk about the series we are getting next weekend, which is the lower bracket series here. We're going to be kicking it off with our 6-7 matchup, the one that's probably going to be a little bit closer here between FlyQuest and TSM. Very intriguing series, I think, between these two teams here. They split it in the regular season, and I think, honestly, it's probably going to be a lot closer than people expect it to be. I know a lot of people are going to see this as a pretty heavily favored FlyQuest series, and honestly, I understand that. Like, I get why. FlyQuest looked a lot better for a majority of the regular season. They ended out the final Week 8 here really, really well. They even took a game off of Team Liquid, even if they didn't look all that competitive the rest of that series. Overall, FlyQuest is a good team, and honestly, they've started to look, relatively okay. I think towards the back half, they definitely had a little bit of a hiccup there, but for TSM, I honestly think they've looked pretty underrated over the past few weeks. Ever since they added Solo here into the top lane, I think Chime coming in has been huge. This team has honestly looked a lot better. Even if everybody on the team isn't perfect, I actually think a lot of what they've been doing recently has actually been pretty good, to the point where I think the series is actually going to be relatively competitive. I think the matchups are interesting here. I think Solo versus Philip in the top lane, probably the least interesting one of them, because Solo has just been kind of the tank guy for TSM, and I think that's absolutely worked. Him playing weak side, him playing Ornn an absolute ton. I think that's been huge for them. I think the consistency in that top lane has been good. That's something they quite frankly didn't have with Huni or with Sol. And so for Solo to come in here, I think it's been a plus for TSM. It's allowed the rest of the map, I think, to play a little bit more aggressive. The jungle matchup here, I definitely think is super TSM favored, in my opinion. You can talk about this all you want, but Spica is still a very, very good player. And a lot of the back half of the regular season was Spica playing pretty out of his mind, controlling TSM's fate, really. There were some games that they won that they really should not have been in, that Spica just did a really good job of enabling TSM in. And honestly, Jose Deodo is just too early game focused for me to really imagine a world in which Spica is not going to be able to punish that in some level. We saw Santorin already do that in the series, and I think you could argue that Spica is even better at doing that. So I would honestly give jungle matchup to TSM, but where I think things flip a little bit is in the mid lane, where I think the matchup is very squarely in FlyQuest's favor. I've talked about how Takuya, I think, is generally underrated in the grand scheme of things. I had him as my first team all-pro mid laner this split. I thought he was the reason that FlyQuest was a good team, at least for the most part. And I think that has continued, I think, into the playoffs, where he was kind of the only member who didn't completely run it against Team Liquid. Maple, on the other hand, I think has been relatively not good for TSM over the course of the year. He's been one of the weaker members of the team. I think you could say the same thing about the bot lane matchup here between Johnson and Instinct, where Instinct is just not LCS ready. I've been talking about it. He's fine. He can get to the late game, but like his laning is just not good. And I definitely think that's something that Johnson can abuse. But what does that leave for my key matchup? Well, that leaves the support matchup between Chime and Aphromoo as my key matchup of the series here. And I know it's kind of weird to be picking supports as the key matchup, but honestly, like, both of these teams really run through their supports very heavily, especially TSM, where Chime has really been a huge influencing factor in a lot of the success that this team has had. You can talk about Instinct not being all that good, but most of the time it's because he gets left on relatively an island, where Chime likes to go and make plays around the map with Spica. They pair up a lot, try to influence Maple in the mid lane, try to control pretty much every objective, and it's really worked for TSM in a lot of their games. Look at Chime's stats. You can talk about it all you want, like small sample size. Number one, 80.3% KP percentage on a support is nuts. Third in vision scored per minute, like fifth in KDA. For a guy who's playing on a bad team, Chime has actually been genuinely great this year, and I really hope that people are seeing that. In my opinion, like I talked about this in my playoff primer video, but if Chime had played the full split, I think there's a real shot that he's an all-pro this year, and I don't even think it's all that close. Unfortunately, he just didn't have the sample size for it, but he's been playing great. And then on the flip side, you've got Aphromoo, who really has been the guy that's unlocked what this FlyQuest team wants to do. Obviously, Johnson has had multiple years in his career now with Aphromoo where he's looked significantly better with him than without him. He had a little bit of a rough series against Core JJ, but I get it. It's Core. It happens. Aphro is significantly, I will say, more lane-focused, I think, than someone like Chime is, where I think Chime likes to move around the map, likes to pair up with Spica and make plays in that sense. I think Aphro is significantly more focused on making sure Johnson gets his lead, and I think Takuya really moves with that. Jose, Deodo, a lot of plays for FlyQuest are made bot lane. I really think the dichotomy between these two players is going to determine what happens. If Chime and Spica can take over the map and get every objective and just snowball something like a mid lane or even the jungle position just completely out of control, TSM's honestly in a pretty good spot here, where if FlyQuest can really punish that matchup, can punish Instinct, if Aphro can play these engagers and really just be an aggressive force that becomes an issue for TSM, FlyQuest really should have this one in the bag. So for me, pretty easy choice for a key matchup here between Chime and Aphromoo. You can make a real case that these are the two most important members on each team. Very, very excited to see this, and honestly, I think this matchup, like I said, is going to be a lot closer than a lot of people think. Moving on to our second series here in Losers Round 1. Definitely another interesting matchup, maybe one that isn't quite as close. We are previewing Counter Logic Gaming versus Golden Guardians. And, you know, they split 1-1 in the regular season. That should tell you something, right? Well, I'm not super sold about that. This Golden Guardians team, you could certainly say, limped across the finish line. I think they ended the season outside of the Dignitas win, like on like an 8-game loss streak. Not exactly what you wanted to see here from a team that honestly looked relatively competent at the start of the year. And CLG, I think you could say the opposite. They really started to find their form towards the back half, and hell, they even really competed with Cloud9. You can argue that they were the better 5-man team in that series in the first round. I'm not going to sit here and say that CLG should absolutely demolish them, but let's just start previewing. Let's go from bottom to top in this one. You have your bot lanes here, Luger and Poom versus Stixxay and Ole. This really should be Luger and Poom favored. They've been very consistent over the course of the year. Yes, Luger made that horrendously bad play towards the back half of Game 5, but outside of that, like, Luger has been very, very good for CLG over the course of the year, like almost all pro caliber. And I think Poom has really helped out with that. Poom is much more of the aggressor, whereas I think Luger is definitely more willing to just play it safe and then capitalize on it. But they play together really well. Stixxay and Ole not exactly had that chemistry throughout the majority of the year, but there are some interesting things that can be thrown at this bot lane. We know Ole's champion pool is incredibly interesting. We've seen them flex the Sejuani down there a lot. We've seen things like the Dr. Mundo. I think there are a lot of different options that they can go to in that bot lane that can maybe give them a little bit of an advantage over Luger and Poom, but just matchup-wise, I would say that CLG should have the advantage there. And then in the mid lane, we've got two very young, very hungry, very aggressive mid laners that have played against each other a lot, going back to their times in Academy. Palafox versus a Blaze Olive. Now, I've talked about how I think ABO is pretty underrated in terms of the community. I think he's usually the only one on this Golden Guardians team that's even attempting to make plays, and often his score line looks bad for it. I think his, he maybe ends up with a lot more deaths than people like, but at the end of the day, I really do think he is one of the only players on this team that when they're losing is actually trying to win. I think you could say similar things about Palafox, but again, he can be a little over-aggressive and definitely more lane-focused. Azir is kind of both of their best picks, so it's going to be very intriguing to see what happens there. I would definitely give the mechanical edge to Palafox, but ABO can make some plays. I don't want to count him out of that matchup by any means. Then you have Contracts versus River. If you would have asked me in spring, I would have told you River, no question, had the advantage in this matchup. He had a really good spring, and Contracts, honestly, is super feast or famine as a player, but man, have those roles completely switched. River might have been the worst player in the LCS in Summer Split. He was not good for Dig, and he was even worse for Golden Guardians. And Contracts honestly really stepped up. And even in the playoff series we just had, where I was expecting a lot more action between Blabber and Contracts, Contracts is really consistent. And really the only times where he lost in the jungle matchup was when they invested a shit ton into specifically shutting him down. So overall, honestly, I would say it's Contracts' favor, but mechanically speaking, Contracts can definitely still have those bad games, and River is a good enough jungler to be able to punish that. He just really hasn't shown all that much in the LCS in Summer Split so far. But that brings us to our key matchup, and the key matchup for me is going to be in the top lane here, Dokla versus Licorice. Now, a lot of people may wonder why this is the key matchup of the series, and that's because I think both of these players are so aggressive that if one loses giga hard, I don't know if there is like a really easy way to come back from that. Most especially in Golden Guardian's case, because Licorice is just, he's the feast or famine god of the top lane. In the early part of the season, he was playing really well, and I think he opened up a lot of what Golden Guardians wanted to do in that top lane, whether he played the Fiora or whether he was playing, more aggressive picks like the Gwen. He didn't actually need all that many resources to be able to really dominate in his laning phase and be able to translate that. But man, something switched in him at around week 4 where he just became awful. One of the worst players in the LCS over the course of that time. Just not good at all. If you get good Licorice, honestly, Golden Guardians is in a much better spot. If you get bad Licorice, I don't think Golden Guardians has even remotely of a chance of winning this series. So I think it's really up to him. Just look at the stats. He's second in solo kills, but he's 11th in gold difference at 15. Like, that should tell you everything you need to know. On the flip side, I think Dokla definitely has some moments as well. We saw it in the Cloud9 series. You put him on something like the Akali where he can take over and he does really well. But in neutral matchups, honestly, he tends to lose neutral matchups, and that's not all that good. He's second in damage per minute, but he's 10th in gold difference at 15, 12th in KP percentage. Neither of these guys really all that involved when they're at their worst. One of these two is going to have to win, and I think that's really going to influence a lot of what happens. If Licorice can actually get an advantage and really push forward with that for Golden Guardians, I actually think, I'm not going to say they have a good shot, but at least they have a shot there. But if Dokla just completely wins this matchup, if he gets his aggressive picks and Licorice can't keep up and compete with him, then I just don't even see really a world in which Golden Guardians really has a shot. But, I really think this series is quote-unquote interesting. Golden Guardians are going to have to show a lot more than they did in the regular season in order for me to really believe in them. But, theoretically, they have a shot. They've got talented players on their team, especially in the solo lanes and even in the jungle. There are things that could go right for GG. I just don't know if it's entirely likely. Alright, that is going to do it for my winners bracket round 1 overview and analysis of both of the series that we had this past weekend. Now it is time for me to give my predictions for the lower bracket round 1. We start with FlyQuest TSM, and like I said, I actually think this is going to be a very close series. If I had to predict it, I actually predict this to go to 5 games. I really think that FlyQuest and TSM are a lot more similar than a lot of people give them credit for, but FlyQuest should be able to take care of TSM. I wouldn't be entirely shocked if TSM was able to take the series, but FlyQuest is more talented. Takuya is a great player. Johnson and Aframu are terrifying, even if Chime and Spica are able to make plays. I think that there's just too much consistency coming out of the other parts of the map from FlyQuest for me to think that TSM is going to be able to capitalize enough to push them forward. Instinct and Maple, I think, are too big of a hindrance to be able to go up against Takuya and Johnson, and in the end, I just don't think TSM has the firepower to be able to compete, but I definitely can see them taking at least a few games here off of FlyQuest, and so I expect this one to be FlyQuest in 5. As for CLG versus Golden Guardians, it's CLG. Like, I don't... if you're expecting me to say anything else, you're crazy. This should be CLG in 3. Like, this should be a sweep, but I'm going to say it's in 4 just because Contracts is bound to have one game where he just doesn't show up, or Dokla or somebody like that is bound to have one game where they just don't show up. That's what happens to CLG, but they are so much better than Golden Guardians. They have been so much better all year long that Golden Guardians really shouldn't have a chance here. They've been, quite frankly, bad. It's kind of a joke that they're even in playoffs in the first place. So CLG should be able to handle this in 3, but, you know, knowing CLG, it'll probably be in 4. So, yeah, that's my picks. FlyQuest in 5, CLG in 3 or 4. Those are my picks for the losers bracket. Obviously, we'll talk about the upper winners bracket later on in the week after we play these losers bracket games because I don't want to make these videos too long and too over-encumbering. But a very, very fun opening week here of LCS action. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, go ahead and leave a like. It really does mean a lot. If you want to see more playoff coverage, we're going over every single major region. If you enjoyed this LCS video, if you want to see the LCK, LPL videos, first of all, check those out. But second of all, hit the subscribe button because I'm going to be posting these almost every single day for the rest of the playoffs. And that's got to be exciting. That's going to be a lot of content. We've already put out so much for the playoffs. The LEC Primer coming out tomorrow. You guys definitely do not want to miss. Get excited for that. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.